The king then was King Henry I. He was the fourth son of William the Conqueror. Henry I was a pretty ruthless character. He managed to get to be king despite having three older brothers. One of them died in a hunting accident whilst Henry was present. So whether he murdered his brother or not. But anyway, Henry I was a king in the sort of Game of Thrones style, pretty well, incredibly powerful. So England in those days had a system where you had moneyers across the nation who produced the silver penny, which was the currency. Now, the silver penny was supposed to be an exact weight, and they had samples at the Tower of London to compare it against. But the moneyers were suspected of adding lead and taking silver out, and even making them underweight and even clipping them after they'd made them. So therefore defrauding the people who they were selling these coins to trade with. So Henry I, Christmas 1124, decided to call them to a court called the Assizes at Winchester, which was historically the major city in England. So after examining the work, they had to bring their coinage that they'd been making. He found that 2/3 of them had been debasing their the silver coins. So much like our Federal Reserve is just diluting by creating, $16 trillion on M1 now. It's just crazy. So yeah, 2/3 are found to have been guilty of debasing the currency. And so that was about 94, I think I recall. Their punishment was they had their right hands amputated and one testicle amputated. Whether they got a choice on which one, I don't.
Hey everyone, this is Rob Keens with 𝙂𝙊𝙀𝙊𝙀. It is February 10th, 2022. We're already in February. It still continues to amaze me how quickly the year goes. But I have back a very special guest who was on our last conference. The medals kick off on January 26th and is going to be a regular on our channel going forward. It's Ian Everard, who started 𝙂𝙊𝙀. Ian, how are you doing?
I'm really well, thank you, Rob. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. And just a reminder to everybody on the program who Ian is. So Ian's a good friend of mine that I've met in person, and I think we originally talked back at my conference in August and been talking back and forth for a while. And you had been in construction, so you ran your own business here in the States for quite a while, successful businessman. And at some point in time, you decided to start a silver business. There was a lot of inspiration that you talked about as to why you did that at the conference. And now you're in the silver business and you're building, I think, a very scalable, very valuable service to people that want to get silver cheaply in any size and scale this up. And I thank you for doing that. Before we get into our conversation today, Ian, I want to just let people know we are aware that the CPI numbers came out today. We're going to address it briefly in the program. By the time you see this, I will have had a breaking news segment focused solely on that on the channel. But I wanted to cover it here in case you guys don't see that. CPI is at 7.5%, I believe, when I looked at the report. So it's gone up from, I think it was the 7.2 it was previous month. So inflation continues to rise in the market, and I believe that that is very positive for gold because at the same time we're having upward pressure on bond rates. The 2-year is really close to 2%. I'm sorry, the 10-year, and the 2-year is at 1.5 and catching up, and we may be in line for a yield curve inversion here before too long. Of course, those typically preface big recessions, so we'll be watching that. So that's an update for you guys on inflation. As you know, Ian, do you have any comment on inflation and bond rates? Before we get started into our topic, how do you see that, and where do you see the economy?
Yeah, I stand by my best guess. I think real inflation for the working person in America will be 25% in Q1.
Okay.
When you count things that people have to buy, like used cars, gasoline, meat. Some people feel they have to eat meat. Bread. I was in a local store and I haven't bought jam because I usually make it, and I saw some on the shelf and it was $5 for a basic variety, not a premium, and I was like, I used to pay 39 pence in the UK 3-4 years ago for a basic jam. So yeah, all anecdotal, but pretty well everything you look at is going up and going up rapidly.
Yeah, so gold and silver aren't necessarily going up rapidly because of the derivatives market. But the way that dynamic works is derivatives are about futures trading. Once the public realizes that we're in some sort of economic crisis, then people flock to gold, silver, and that's where you see that script flip. So for people who are wondering why gold and silver aren't following the inflation story right now, it's because it's the futures. It has nothing to do with the physical market, and you can confirm this running a physical business. The derivative market has nothing to do with real gold and silver, and it will reflect the market when it's forced to reflect the market when we have an economic crisis. Generally, how this goes. That's why gold and silver did very well, during the pandemic in 2020. All right, so you have some history for us and some interesting information for what happens when you go through a reset. And the reason it's interesting, and we want to talk about that on the program, is I've said many times that we're going through a reset. I think they're going to try to take us to central bank digital currencies. I think the dollar's sort of on its last legs. This process will happen over the next year to 2 years at the most, I think. And then we're going to be introduced to a new system. But there are always consequences when economic and currency systems fail, and you have quite a bit of history on that. So tell us a little bit about what your research has.
Yeah, sure. Especially for those who might not make it to the end of the video, and I'd always recommend make it to the end of Rob's videos. So a little bit of historical fun, but a very strong cautionary tale to the heads of central banks who are relentlessly debasing our currency. It's not their currency, it's our currency. It's what we earn, it's what we trade with, and what most people, probably 99% of people, save with for their retirement, to have choices in the future. So we will rewind in England way back to 1124, and the king then was King Henry I. He was the fourth son of William the Conqueror. Henry I was a pretty ruthless character. He managed to get to be king despite having 3 older brothers. One of them died in a hunting accident whilst Henry was present, so whether he murdered his brother or not. But anyway, Henry I was a king in the sort of Game of Thrones style, pretty well, incredibly powerful. So England in those days had a system where you had moneyers across the nation who produced the silver penny, which was the currency. Now, the silver penny was supposed to be an exact weight, and they had samples at the Tower of London to compare it against. But the moneyers were suspected of adding lead and taking silver out, and even making them underweight, and even clipping them after they'd made them. So therefore defrauding the people who they were selling these coins to trade with. So Henry I, Christmas 1124, decided to call them to a court called the Assizes at Winchester, which was historically the major city in England. So after examining the work, they had to bring their coinage that they'd been making. He found that 2/3 of them had been debasing their the silver coins. So much like our Federal Reserve is just diluting by creating, I don't know, $16 trillion on M1 now. It's just crazy. So yeah, two-thirds are found to have been guilty of debasing the currency. And so that was about 94, I think, I recall. Their punishment was they had their right hands amputated and one testicle amputated. Whether they got a choice on which one, I don't know, but the warning was when they got back to their hometown, it was pretty clear the king was not happy with them, and it was probably a more effective warning than actually executing them on the spot. So yeah, we can look back at history, and so 900 years ago nearly, and the moneyers, or central banks in effect, were at it then, debasing the currency for their own gain.
Yeah, and I wonder who will be the people that do that this time. Of course, the dynamic's a little bit different. Back then, the crown needed stable money supply to finance their wars and whatever they were doing. And now, however, I think the central bankers and the government are more in bed with each other in that they kind of need each other. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be U.S. Congress. I mean, U.S. Congress will be angry in interviews with the central bankers, and they'll yell and scream, and it'll all be good theater. But I don't think anybody's going to be really, the bankers never seem to go to jail here.
Yeah.
So who would replace the king in that case and holding, the money lenders and the bankers to account? Is it going to be we the people this time?
I think that's the only choice we have, Rob. We the people can start using silver, gold, copper, platinum, all the known precious metals. We can start using them to trade with again. I pay my web guy, and fully reported, but I pay him in silver. I'm just negotiating with my local garage to do some work on some of my vehicles. We're talking about them being happy to have the labour elements paid in silver. And I just started a syndicate by invitation, forming a group of people who will have silver stored in one location. And one of the objectives of that, they will be able to trade with each other with zero transaction costs. So I think the more people think, well, yeah, you can do something. Don't think because you have a limited means, there's nothing you can do. I've had one customer recently bought $17 worth of the 40% Kennedy halves. Because it was such a small order, I'm holding them for them at no charge till they can build up enough month by month to have them delivered. So that was a single mother, very limited budget, knows the system is falling apart and wants to do something. And I think what one finds is when you start to look at a situation and start to do what you can, other solutions occur. You meet other people and opportunities happen. It's just don't think we're not going to solve our individual situations all at once. It could be 1,000 steps, but take step one.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And it starts with a single person at a time.
Yeah.
And it starts with the people building from the ground up, grassroots efforts, right? We build Gold Silver Pros from the ground up, because it's not like when I went out, I was syndicated across financial media, but it's not like they were prioritizing my content over everything else. I was the contrarian in the room. And so I realized to truly reach a bigger audience, I was going to have to get off of those platforms. And that's why I started Gold Silver Pros. And it was a labor of love. It took years from a writing perspective and then going into social media to really build it. Of course, we've had, really good last year and a half as we focused, on the social media. It's really helped. And, thinking about all the connections that we've made and all the people that are following us, there's been a big response to that. And I really think in the free market, that's the way it has to occur.
Yeah.
The free market, Ian, is not big corporates and banking systems and government entities and quasi-government entities and the Fed, controlling things top down. They lose track of the small guy, and so they can't serve the small guy when they get too big. That's why these central institutions are never scalable. If you look at China, for example, when I was in college, I took a class in Chinese history, and a gentleman that was teaching it was from China. He'd been a professor in China for a long time, had a lot of experience, lived through a lot of what happened in China in the last century. And he was telling us, in China, they kept trying to go through this cultural revolution and reinstitute communism. And what happened, communism is a great utopian idea, but it breaks down in the face of scale, because what happens is you have to have controllers at the top who start to take advantage of people because they lose track of the original reason why they're doing it. In other words, whenever you allow centralized power, no matter how good the original idea, it leads to corruption, because the people that ascend to those positions are not, you and I, and they don't have our interests at heart, and the framework of that entity itself loses track because they're not connected to the people. So that's a long way of me saying I'm glad you're doing what you're doing and helping people the way that you are, because that's the way it needs to happen. It needs to be organic, and we need to do it. And it's really through networking that, that we can do those things. And I think we the people, to answer my own question, I think we the people are going to be the ones that hold those, the government and the banks to account. And we certainly, it doesn't have to be as bloody as what, the king did back then. We're living in a different time. I think it'd be a lot easier, and simply, Ian, I think it's making the decision to put precious metals in your life is really the first step for everybody, don't you think?
It is. Yes. So going back to your example of China, the issue is, even if that leader was benevolent and wasn't self-seeking, a command economy which, from what I understand, when GDP exceeds 50%, 50% of GDP is government expenditure. That's called a command economy. Typically, that's a communist regime. I think, you may be able to correct me, Rob, in the US, we're around 48, 49% of GDP is now government expenditure. And if you count...
Yeah, so we're basically what China used to be, right?
and if you count the stimulus checks and the PPI and all of those loans and all of the unknown loans and money creation for the big banks that were failing with the repo crisis in September 19, if you count all of that, all the false GDP, we might be well over 50% is government or central bank created now. And what that does, it leads to a terrible, disastrous in the long term, misallocation of labor, resources, energy, capital. They all get misallocated. And then you add to that, the financial system has grown so predatory, really. It's even more than parasitic. It's predatory. It just consumes without creating anything.
I agree with you. This is a conversation I was reminded of the other day I had with someone where we're talking about, I was talking about my good friend Chris 𝙂𝙊𝙇𝙑𝙀𝙍 is a money manager in the U.S. and how capitalism, we don't have capitalism right now, and it's something completely different. And he said, Rob, as a money manager, he said, I got to the point where I don't believe we're in capitalism, and I believe it's more, like you said, predatory, and it's almost designed, to steal people's wealth. And I agree. When I had my licenses for a very short period of time, all those financial licenses that I held long time ago, the reason I no longer hold them is because that's what I saw. I saw brokers trading against the book of their customers. In other words, they know where their customers are positioned. They trade against an easy way to make money because you know what their weaknesses are in their positions. And it became very predatory. And I don't know exactly when this occurred, but I saw that in the financial system, and that's why I decided I didn't want to be a part of that system anymore. And I always wanted to be independent from it because I think it's become institutionalized within the financial sector to take advantage of the people that you should be serving.
Yeah.
And once it gets to that point, I think that system really needs to just reset. When we talk about reset, there are the global financiers and central banks that want to reset into their system. I think we need to talk about resetting into our system. And I keep coming back to the precious metals. It's really, for me, the easiest way for people to do it, I think, in my opinion. Is that why you went into silver versus Bitcoin, or were these other alternatives? Or, did you... What was your original thought when you thought about this? And, did you immediately come to silver, or was that just a process for you?
It was a process, but it seemed to be every piece of research, every piece of history, every time that governments took their nation off a silver standard, it was to the detriment of the working person. 1873 was that when America came off the silver standard, late 18s. Up until then, a miner, prospector, could mine silver, take it to a government body and get it turned into silver dollars, turn it into money. That ceased, and the reason I perceive they went from silver to gold was the bankers held the gold and the people had the silver. So if you crashed the value, the purchasing power of silver, that shifted to gold, and it enriched the people who had the riches already. I mean, you can go back, Britain did the same, 1816, I think. Germany did 1861. And just a history of silver, going back to the founding of the East India Company, that was based on extracting silver from Britain, taking it to the East and getting twice as much gold for it there, because the ratio was 10 to 1 there, when it was 20 to 1 in Europe. And that led to the founding of the East India Company by the extraction of the wealth of the people in Britain. And that was done by bribing the king to allow them to do it. So it seems to be every time silver is pulled out of the hands of people as money, it rapidly impoverishes and puts into some sort of slavery, sort of living wage check to wage check, as we have most Americans now. But many, many more reasons on silver. Also just the mathematical dynamics. We're using more than we mine. We throw it away at an incredible, reckless rate. So eventually, and it might be 6 months, it might be 18 months, the mathematics works out supply and demand, and it doesn't matter how many contracts, fake paper silver they create, when there's no physical left, what is available will rapidly accelerate in price. So yeah, I'm 100% convinced, 100% fully persuaded. It's not even an asymmetrical bet. It's 100% guaranteed that if you put your fiat currencies, if you transfer them into silver and gold, I do sell gold as well now, you're going to come off better. And it's going to be a rocky storm. They're going to keep throwing a few wobblies at us. I mean, I bought 7,500 ounces at around $26 an ounce. Well, am I concerned? Well, I was a little bit at the time. You start doing the math and you think how much underwater you are. But then I haven't bought it to sell it. I haven't bought it to trade. I've bought it to as withdraw out of the fiat system as steadily as I can.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talk a lot about British history, and I really value that because if you look at the United States Constitution, it was based originally on the Magna Carta. John Adams, who wrote the Constitution, said that. And so a lot of our common law system, especially, which is almost forgotten in America now, but which is crucial to the Constitution and our rights, the Bill of Rights, really came from the Magna Carta and that document, which was, the barons and dukes basically showed up and said, and threatened to, kill the king at Runnymede and said, you got to sign this. And basically forced the kings to give rights to the royalty. And that was really a balance of power back then between, the implementers of that system, which were the royalty and the king, who depended upon them because that's where he got his taxes and, they implemented his policies. And the difference, however, is when it came over to America, what they did is they removed royalty from it and said, everybody, this system is good for everybody. These laws and this system, we're transferring it to everybody, and you can't take a title of royalty in the U.S. I do think, Ian, that title of royalty has been replaced by special interests and by government handouts, corporations and things like that now are treated as different than the everyday individual. And so we've just moved from a royal type of system to more of a corporatism, but corporatism really isn't free market capitalism, in my opinion. I didn't know if you had an opinion on that as well.
Well, it doesn't appear that we have free market capitalism. It seems to be that the gains are private and the risks are socialized. Every time a big institution gets into trouble, from what I've studied, going back to long-term capital management, I think that was 1999, that situation got bailed out. AIG, they got bailed out. Everybody seems to get bailed out if they stay part of the club. And it seems to be the new royalty is the super rich. I think I just read this morning, the richest free Americans now have more wealth than the bottom 50% of Americans. So that's free people against 160 million. That would seem to me that they're even wealthier than the royal kings were back in history. At least there was a balance. You had dynastic families spread across the nation who could challenge, and often did challenge, the king, who could hire a private army at short notice if the king did go too crazy. But now we have, I'm going to mention it, we have Jeff Bezos building that obscene yacht, and they've actually got to take a bridge apart to get it out onto the ocean, which they promised they would never take this bridge apart after it was restored after World War II. And it seems to be...
But they're going to do it for Bezos.
And you
might as well call him Sir Bezos at this point.
You can understand, that shipyard got a huge amount of jobs and it provided prosperity for that community. And then to an extent, if you build a corporation and you earn a huge amount of money, it's up to you how you spend it. That's the bit of free market capitalism I agree with. But Bezos didn't get to where he was with free market capitalism. He didn't charge state purchase tax on states where the competition had to charge it. So he had a government subsidy to build the business he's got. Elon Musk, let's name them all. Heck, has he ever made money? it's carbon credits, and the credits the motor manufacturers have to make to get their emissions down to a certain level per vehicle. If they don't do it, they buy them off Elon Musk. I think it's about 4 billion. It's a huge amount.
It's more than the profit he's ever made on the business.
Yeah, and he calls that profit. And I think he knows. He's just very smart. He's playing the system, and you know. But the problem is when you have individuals who can play the system and manipulate it, they become unaccountable. They become so powerful that there's no checks and balances. And he very cleverly, what did he do? He twittered out to his followers, "Shall I sell some shares and pay tax on unrealized gains?" He was going to do it anyway. It was a smoke screen, you know, and the shares have been falling, I think, ever since he started selling. And his brother started selling a week before all of that. So obviously there was some family communication to time to bail out. And Bezos, he said he would never sell Amazon shares. He's been selling them.
Yeah, Microsoft, the big, especially the big tech-related guys or tech company guys. Because if you look at the NASDAQ, Ian, there's a statistic that the top 7 or 8 companies are carrying NASDAQ, while almost half of the companies have lost almost half of their valuation over the last year plus. So the NASDAQ is really suffering from an overall standpoint in terms of the companies. But in aggregate, it looks okay because of these big giants. And what do the big giants do? Those insiders are selling their stock. So what does that say where the NASDAQ is going to be in a year or two if the only companies carrying the index, all the insiders are dumping out? So if you're in the NASDAQ right now, are you really super confident that in a NASDAQ type of fund, are you really super confident that you should be there, for the next 2 years?
Yeah, you're you're not diversified, are you? In effect. I think I'm right that the plunge protection team, their mission, they purchase, and I don't know if it's even transparent, I don't know if we can see the amounts and the timing, but they purchase the stock of the 7 largest companies in the US, because that way they can manipulate the markets, manipulate the algorithms, which Chris, the film guy, 𝙂𝙊𝙇𝙀𝙍, I think I remember talking to him about. If you can tweak those, the computer systems follow, and the market can be held or even driven upwards. And even like when you said, all the rest of the companies have lost half of their value. It's a crazy setup. You wouldn't believe it if some science fiction author or author of fiction wrote a book about it. You'd think it would be impossible that it could all be held together, but somehow they're still managing to play the Wizard of Oz, really, isn't it? I guess pull the levers and make the noises, and
that's a good analog for what we're in. It's the old story of Dorothy, the Wizard of Oz, seeing all of the people along the way that she met which were true, but just needed to believe themselves. And then, of course, Oz was a small guy behind a curtain pulling levers. And that does really describe the government. It's so fragile. I don't think people realize how fragile everything is in America. On its surface, it looks like everything's made out of bedrock and marble and granite. That's why banks have marble and granite out front. But the banking system is extremely fragile. And we've proven that time and time again, especially during the last financial crisis in 2008, 2009. So I do like the fact that you talk about British history, because I think that there are analogs and similarities with every major nation state that's existed, and how they ended up losing their power and how those currency resets happened. But you live in the United States now, Ian. So talk a little bit about your experience here in the United States. Are you a fully converted American?
Do you know what, Rob? I think I was from childhood. I always used to listen to Voice of America on an old shortwave World War II radio. My dad fixed up for me. I used to listen every week to a guy called Alistair Cooke, and he was a British journalist based in New York, I think. And every week he'd do a broadcast called A Letter from America. And basically it was trying to explain world events and events that are happening in America from an American point of view, an American understanding. And I found over my adult years that it often seemed America was very misunderstood, maligned without reason, not maligned when it should have been. and just considered a very, very strange place, really. I think there was a lot of jealousy, and understandably, after World War II, the only industrial nation left standing was America. And I think if you had a pulse, you could not but make a good living in America after World War II, because there was no competition. Japan was done. China didn't exist as an industrial nation. Britain was in a terrible state, had lost most of its adult male workers. Germany was devastated. The psychological trauma was huge. Yet America was very positive, and hence we had that boom time in America from the 50s and into the 60s. And unfortunately, I think the psyche in America is still that can carry on. But basically, those 4 or 5 decades after World War II gave the appearance of huge wealth and huge prosperity, but a lot of it was drawing from the future. Hence the 30 trillion government deficit that we know of. And then the 100 to 200 trillion of unfunded liabilities. People think they might get a pension. The firemen, the policemen, the government employees think they might get a pension. But Alan Greenspan was very transparent. He was asked, you probably remember listening to it, it's been played quite a few times recently. He was asked, can the American government honour its liabilities? Can they keep sending a cheque out for all the promises they've made? And he said, yeah, of course they can, because the American government creates the currency to pay the cheque, so they can always create the dollars to send the cheque out. But he added a caveat: we won't be able to guarantee what it will purchase. So basically, it's saying we cannot honour our obligations in the future. So all of this debt, the 30 trillion is a little bit scary, but the unfunded liabilities are the really scary bit, because the policy to allow inflation to run hot, and I believe it's a deliberate policy. They may appear like they don't know what they're doing, and we can malign them, the central banks that have done all this money creation, which is the inflation. And some people argue their objective there is to reduce the burden of the debt. You can inflate away the capital value of the debt by letting inflation run hot. But what that does, that increases the cost of your unfunded liabilities, which could be 5 times greater than your debt. So kicking the can down the road, but it's there won't be a road eventually to kick the can down. And I think we're very close to that, Rob. I think we're very, very close.
I think we are, and I think, we have definitely different perspectives based upon our life and kind of where we came from. I'm from Texas, but the thing that I like in bringing you on, Ian, is you came to sort of the same conclusions we did, and you really want the same thing. The criticisms we all have are of the government and the central bank. It's not of the American way of life of the American people, and I think that's where we need to separate things. Every government at some point in the life cycle of a nation, going back to Sir John Glubb's research and 𝙂𝙊𝙇𝘖 out of Russia, they came upon the same conclusion. The government separate themselves from the people. So when we're criticizing all these policy decisions, we're not criticizing the people. You have to take the people separately. The government of America has left the people. It's no longer a government of the people. It's no longer a constitutionally sound and honest government answering to the people. And so it's fair for us to criticize, especially in America, because the whole basis of our contract, and the Constitution's a contract, by the way, which the people can rescind at any time, and I want to remind the people of that, is that the government is responsible to answer to the people, and it's a restrictive document designed to say this is what you can't do, and these are all the guaranteed rights of the people you're governing. But Americans can take that away at any time, and it doesn't have to be a bloody revolution. We simply just have to say, we're tired of you and we don't support you anymore.
Yeah.
And I think you and I are in the same spot, and where the way that you do that is you talk about these things. First of all, we have the right to assemble, free speech, all that kind of thing, and we have the right to talk about it, and we need to talk about it, and we need to organize, these types of systems. I do a lot of promotion and research and things like that, talking about the sector, and you're building a company which allows people to get into silver, big or small, at probably the lowest rate possible. And now, like you said, you're running, some gold as well. So talk a little bit, Ian, about some of the opportunities 𝙭Silver has for people if they're interested in getting access to the products that you do.
Yeah, we still have the monster 1,000-ounce bars at 99 cents over spot, delivered, insured, and can even do a quantity discount on those. For a limited time for Gold Silver Pros code users, I have managed to get some more of the 40% Kennedy halves, and I can do some of those at 99 cents, go right back to the 99 cents over the spot. I've been scouring America for them. I managed to get a few more in, and I'm hedging my...
It's constitutional silver, Ian. So talking about the Constitution a moment ago, the 40% Kenny halves are the constitutionally printed silver coins America had before they debased and went, to the base metals.
Yeah. So, the last American U.S. coinage that had silver in it.
A little bit of history there.
A lot of history, yeah. And
so I think you also had another bit of history for us around Montague. Perhaps you could take a moment and share that with us as we wrap up.
I think we could also leave some of this maybe for homework. We'll make sure I'll get it up on my website, and I'm sure Rob will get it on his website. But I'll read it out, and I'll just give a little bit of background of who Lord Montague was. So Lord Montague Norman, his maternal grandfather and his paternal grandfather were governors of the Bank of England. So there's a family thing going on here. So he was governor of the Bank of England from 1912, 1914, I think, 1916 to 1944. So he had a huge reign. And that was a time when the British Empire was pretty powerful, probably near its peak. So he was the most powerful man in the world. So he came to New York in 1924 and gave a speech to the American Bankers Association. Now, we know this speech is word for word what he said because, one, it was printed in the Idaho Leader later that year. Two, it was read out in the Australian Parliament, which gets recorded in the Australian Hansard, which is a word for word transcript of what is spoken in the Parliament. So I'll read it out, and there's a lot in it, and then maybe we could just pick a few points that we could ask the listeners to ponder and see how it affects them personally.
Good thought exercise here.
Okay, so quoting from Lord Montague Norman, 1924, speech to the United States Bankers Association in New York City. Capital must protect itself in every possible way, both by combination and legislation. Debts must be collected, mortgages foreclosed as rapidly as possible. When, through the process of law, the common people lose their homes, they will become more docile and more easily governed through the strong arm of the government, applied by a central power of wealth under leading financiers. These truths are well known among our principal men, who are now engaged in forming an imperialism to govern the world. By dividing the voter through the political party system, we can get them to expend their energies in fighting for questions of no importance. It is thus by discreet action we can secure for ourselves that which has been so well planned and so successfully accomplished. Now, when I first read that, I was so angry because I love this nation. I love the people. I consider myself an American. I'm going to apply for citizenship. I've been coming to America since 2010, over 30 visits before I moved here. And I don't think anything has changed from this quotation. None of this has gone away. And in fact, they've been increasing their power, increasing their control, increasing the division amongst the people. You look how polarized the Republican Party is now, and you look how polarized the Democrats are. there seems to be no discussion. When one's in power and they want to do something that the other party did want to do when they were in power, it's no, we won't talk about it. Just because it's so polarized to the damage of the American people. And it seems like this has been planned, at least since 1924, that we're allowed to have the political parties. So we spend all this time fighting each other. And if it's not politics, it's race. And if it's not race, it's vax, anti-vax, mask, no mask. It's just on and on. And so, yeah, it made me so angry, but really I think it was a drive, well, what can I do about it? And one, I can obviously talk to as many people as listen. And I used to hand out copies of this, and some people would take notice and some people won't. I think it seems to be demographically that about 30% of the population will actually listen and do something. When they're informed, they will actually do something radical to change the situation. 30% are maybes, and 30% just will not change. They can't conceive of change, and psychologically maybe they're unable to. I don't know. But yeah, there was a lot in that speech, and I would recommend that everybody gets a copy, prints it out, and maybe print out 10 copies and give them to people that you think would be interested to understand who is pulling the strings, who are the puppeteers.
Yeah, that's very interesting you say that. There is always, as nation states age, especially the primary nation state gets more powerful, there is an incentive for people to centralize that power and use it for their means. And this isn't, people immediately want to say conspiracy theory, but a lot of great leaders have spoken about this. Napoleon Bonaparte spoke about it. Eisenhower spoke about it. Kennedy spoke about it. Lots of philosophers have documented this. And it just makes sense logically. If you are one of these wealthy capitalists who, want to get wealthier and wealthier, and that's your primary objective, the only way to do it is to use centralized control schemes. Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me at all that, this has been in place for a long time. I mean, we've had the robber barons in the United States. Yeah. Then we have concentration of media power, concentration of banking power, concentration of government power. And it is clear for anybody to see. I think people can see that where we started from with the Declaration of Independence to now, we're a completely different system than we were before. And I don't think that's a stretch at all, really, to talk about. So I think it is a really good thought exercise. I do think, Ian, we should talk more about that, but I actually want to bring somebody else on the show for us to come back and maybe have a roundtable on that, just that, the components of that speech. Yeah. Because I think it's so powerful to consider that if you're doing anything in finance, you have to consider all of the players. Yeah. And I use this very simple example. If you're sitting at the poker table and you don't know who the patsy is, guess who the patsy is? You're the patsy. Yeah. Because those people, I guarantee you, have been talking before they organized the poker game. Yeah. And we the people now have to consider that we were made the patsy. And so now when we sit down at this poker table, we have to figure out, okay, how do we make the game more honest? And how do we give ourselves a shot? Because at the end of the day, it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And those were the inalienable rights that were codified into that Constitution for us. And in order for us to have those, we the people need to exercise our power. It's really the only way it's going to happen. And part of that power is in owning precious metals, and part of that power, Ian, is in having conversations like this, I believe, is very productive. And so thank you for bringing all of that knowledge and research to us. Like I said, we're going to have you on the program many, many more times because I think that you have a unique perspective, and I think that the business that you're running is a real value to people because it allows them to get in, again, whatever income level they're at, maybe much more effectively in precious metals than a lot of other places. So I appreciate you doing that and appreciate you being on the program.
Thank you, Rob.
And any last thoughts for our audience before we go ahead and wrap this up, Ian?
Yeah, we've got to keep some joy through all of this because if we get too downtrodden, everything becomes harder. So, but yeah, I mean, one of the best results of starting 𝙂𝙊𝙇𝘿 is the quality people I've met and the friends I've made is just incredible. just incredible. Obviously, I can't mention most of them by name because they're clients, but they're exceptional people, well loved in their communities. And yeah, and just one final comment, just sort of skirting a little bit back to what we said. And I heard one of the speakers at the New Orleans Investment Conference, and he said, know the course that you're playing on. So the better we understand what is going on and who's pulling the strings, the decisions we make, small and large, will be much more effective. And instead of trying to bang your head against it, we can build an alternative system, and we are building an alternative system. And as Ron Paul recently said, the last speech I heard him make, he said, well, he has said, end the Fed. But he posed, why not make the Fed irrelevant? So by doing what we're doing, Rob, and helping other people do it, we can make central banks irrelevant.
I believe so, and that's a perfect last thought to end on. Thank you, Ian, so much for stopping by. I thank everybody for tuning into the channel. If you want to get access to Ian's deals, of course, you can reach out to him directly or go to our website, goldsilverpros.com. You can click on the link underneath ARC Silver. We have a custom form developed where you can fill out what you're looking for. It'll send it to Ian's account management team, and they will help you out so that you can, of course, track that transaction through email as well. All right, until next time, this is Rob Kienzle, Gold Silver Pros. This is Robert. Thank you so much for watching that video content. I have a couple of quick announcements I'd like to share with you as we head out of this video. Also wanted to remind you, you can find us on goldsilverpros.com. We have a free newsletter. If you click here and enter your email address, we'll send that out every Monday to you, as well as we have special precious metals deals with leading bullion dealers here in the United States. If you click that button, you can go here and click on either Miles Franklin or ARC Silver and get the best deals in the business. Once again, thank you guys so much for joining us on the channel. Until next time, this has been Gold Silver Pros.